My sister banned me from Christmas because she said my husband was undignified. She said he would embarrass the family. What she didn't know was that banning me would expose the biggest truth of her life. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The call came on a quiet afternoon while I was folding laundry. Lauren's voice sounded polite, almost careful, the way someone sounds when they've already decided something and just need you to accept it. She said Christmas dinner would be small this year. Immediate family only. No explanations at first, just a tone that made it clear the decision was final. I knew what she meant before she said it. When I asked if Ethan and I were still welcome, there was a pause. A long one. Then she said it would be better if I came alone. She said it wasn't personal. She said she was just trying to keep things appropriate. That word landed heavy. Appropriate for who, I wondered, and according to whose rules? Lauren has always cared deeply about appearances. The right house, the right table settings, the right conversations. Our family learned long ago that comfort came from not questioning her standards. I had learned how to stay quiet, how to smooth things over, how to pretend that small cuts didn't hurt. But this wasn't small. This was my marriage. This was the man who stood beside me every day. When I asked her to be honest, she finally said it. She said Ethan's work and background didn't fit the kind of Christmas she was hosting. She said people would talk. She said she didn't want any awkwardness. Her words were calm, but they carried a clear message: my husband was something to be hidden. I felt heat rise in my chest, not the kind that makes you shout, but the kind that makes everything very clear. I thought of all the holidays we had shown up on time, bringing food, offering help, smiling through sideways looks. I thought of how Ethan never complained, never defended himself, never asked me to choose. And here my sister was, asking me to do exactly that. I didn't yell. I didn't cry on the phone. I just listened. When the call ended, the house felt quiet in a different way. Heavy. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, realizing that this had never been about one dinner. It was about who was considered worthy and who was not. That night, I told Ethan what happened. He listened the same way he always does, steady and calm. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded and said that Christmas was only special if it was spent with people who wanted you there as you are. That was the moment something shifted in me. I understood that being banned wasn't the real pain. The real pain was seeing, clearly and finally, the shame my sister carried and tried to place on us. And for the first time, I knew I wasn't going to carry it anymore. Looking back, this didn't start with Christmas. It started years ago, back when Lauren and I were still kids living under the same roof. She was the one everyone admired. Teachers praised her, relatives bragged about her, and my parents spoke about her future as if it was already guaranteed. I was the quiet one in the background. I wasn't a problem, but I wasn't a source of pride either. I learned early that being tolerated was not the same as being valued. As we grew older, the pattern stayed the same. Lauren's choices were celebrated, even when they hurt others. If she spoke sharply, it was called confidence. If I spoke up, it was called being sensitive. My parents never said Lauren was better, but they didn't have to. Their silence did the work for them. I adjusted myself to fit the space left over. When Lauren married, it became another reason for admiration. Her life looked impressive from the outside, and our family leaned into that image. Gatherings were planned around her schedule, her preferences, her mood. If something made her uncomfortable, it was changed without question. If something made me uncomfortable, I was expected to handle it quietly. When I married Ethan, the reaction was different. No one objected openly. They smiled, offered congratulations, and welcomed him with careful politeness. But it never went deeper than that. He was thanked, never embraced. Included, but never truly counted. At family dinners, conversations drifted away from him. Compliments were brief and surface level. He noticed even when he pretended not to. I told myself it was fine. I told myself not everyone shows warmth the same way. I believed that if we stayed kind, showed up, and didn't make waves, things would eventually change. Keeping the peace became my role. I learned how to laugh things off, how to excuse small slights, how to redirect conversations when they became uncomfortable. There were signs I chose to ignore. Moments when Lauren corrected Ethan in front of others. Jokes that landed a little too close to disrespect. Comments about standards and expectations that clearly didn't include us. Each time, I let it go, telling myself it wasn't worth the tension. But peace built on silence doesn't last. It only stretches until it breaks. The Christmas ban didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of years of quiet imbalance, years of swallowing discomfort so others could feel superior. That phone call forced me to see what I had been avoiding. For the first time, I understood that the problem wasn't Ethan fitting in. It was that our family had built a hierarchy, and Lauren sat comfortably at the top. Everything else, including my marriage, was expected to fall in line. And in that moment, I knew something had to change, because I could no longer protect a peace that required me to erase myself. Ethan has never been ashamed of the work he does. He leaves the house early, comes home tired, and carries the marks of a long day on his hands and shoulders. His job isn't fancy, and it doesn't come with titles that impress people at dinner tables, but it keeps things running that others take for granted. He's proud of earning an honest living, even when it costs him energy and comfort. Lauren never understood that. To her, success was something you could show off. It was clean shoes, smooth hands, and conversations filled with numbers and connections. She noticed everything about Ethan that didn't match her idea of worth. The way he dressed simply. The way he spoke only when he had something to say. The way he listened more than he talked. None of it impressed her. Her comments started small. Little jokes about his clothes. Light remarks about his quietness. She said them with a smile, always followed by laughter, so if anyone reacted, it looked like they couldn't take a joke. Over time, those comments became sharper. She spoke about ambition while looking straight at him. She talked about raising standards while sitting across the table from us. One evening, while I was helping in the kitchen, Ethan stepped into the hallway at the wrong moment. Lauren didn't know he was there. She said something about how certain people should know their place and not try to blend into spaces they didn't belong. She didn't use his name, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. Ethan stood there quietly, heard every word, and walked away without making a sound. When I found him later, he acted normal. Too normal. That's how I knew something was wrong. After he told me what he heard, my chest tightened. I confronted Lauren right then. I told her her words were cruel and unnecessary. I asked her how she could speak that way about someone who had never disrespected her. She brushed it off. She said I was overreacting. She said people were allowed to have opinions. When I looked to my parents for support, they avoided my eyes. One of them said it wasn't the time to start drama. The other said Lauren didn't mean it that way. That silence hurt more than Lauren's words. It told me exactly where we stood. I was asking for basic respect, and they were asking me to stay quiet again. Ethan said nothing. He never defended himself, not because he didn't feel it, but because he didn't want to put me in the middle. That was when the betrayal settled in. Not loudly, but heavily. I realized that in their eyes, Ethan's dignity was optional. His feelings were something to manage, not protect. And mine were inconvenient. In that moment, I understood that love and effort weren't enough to earn respect from people who had already decided your value. A few days after everything came to the surface, Lauren reached out again. This time, her voice was firm, almost rehearsed. She said she had thought it through and found a solution. She told me I could still come to Christmas dinner if I wanted. There was a pause, then she added the condition. I would need to come alone. She said it would only be for one night. She said I shouldn't make it difficult. She said family gatherings sometimes required compromise. The way she spoke made it sound reasonable, as if she were doing me a favor. But what she was really asking was for me to pretend my husband didn't exist so her evening could stay comfortable. I told her no. I said my marriage wasn't something I could step out of for a holiday. I said if Ethan wasn't welcome, then neither was I. My voice shook, but my answer didn't change. That was the first time I had ever said no to her without trying to soften it. Lauren's tone changed instantly. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was choosing conflict. She reminded me that everyone else was managing just fine. I realized then that she didn't see my refusal as self-respect. She saw it as disobedience. The next day, a message arrived in the family group chat. It was polite and carefully worded. It said that due to limited space and planning concerns, Ethan and I would not be attending Christmas this year. It ended with a line about understanding and love. Seeing it written that way made my hands shake. It felt official, final, and deeply cold. What hurt most was what came after. My parents responded with approval. They said it was best to avoid tension. They said holidays should be peaceful. No one asked how I felt. No one questioned the fairness of it. The decision was treated as settled, as if I had never mattered in the first place. I felt something inside me go quiet. Not angry, not loud, just numb. I realized I wasn't just being left out of a dinner. I was being erased to make someone else more comfortable. My place in the family was conditional, and I had finally crossed the line where silence was no longer enough. That night, I sat beside Ethan and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took my hand and told me he was proud of me. No one had ever said that to me after a family conflict before. For the first time, I understood that exclusion can be louder than insults. Being uninvited wasn't just a decision. It was a message. And it made one thing very clear. I was done shrinking myself to fit into a space where my dignity was optional. After everything settled, the house felt calmer than I expected. There were no more calls, no messages asking me to reconsider. It was as if a door had quietly closed. One evening, while we were sitting together at the kitchen table, Ethan looked at me and spoke gently but firmly. He told me I didn't owe anyone an explanation. He said love doesn't require permission, and respect shouldn't have to be begged for. Those words stayed with me. For years, I had measured myself through my family's approval. I had waited for small signs that I was doing enough to belong. In that moment, I realized how tired I was of chasing something that was always just out of reach. I decided I wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table that didn't want us. We started talking about what Christmas could look like without all that pressure. Simple things. Cooking together. Sleeping in. Visiting a quiet place nearby. For the first time, the holiday felt peaceful instead of heavy. There was no planning around moods, no fear of saying the wrong thing. Just space to breathe. As the days passed, I felt myself letting go. I stopped checking my phone, stopped replaying conversations in my head. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices anymore. Choosing my husband wasn't a sacrifice. It was clarity. Then something unexpected happened. I received a call from someone I hadn't heard from in a while. It was a relative who had always been fair, someone whose presence carried weight in our family. They spoke carefully, but their message was clear. They had heard what happened, and they didn't agree with it. They told me there would be a gathering on Christmas as well, hosted elsewhere. A smaller one, but meaningful. They said I was welcome, and so was Ethan. Not as an exception, not as a compromise, but as family. They said it wouldn't feel right to celebrate without us. I sat quietly after the call ended. My hands were steady, but my heart was full. I wasn't being invited out of pity. I was being invited because someone saw the situation clearly and refused to ignore it. When I told Ethan, he smiled in that calm way of his. He said we would go if I wanted to, and we would stay home if I didn't. The choice was mine. That alone felt like a gift. In that moment, I understood that dignity doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through people who see your worth without needing to be convinced. And for the first time, I felt ready to walk into whatever came next without carrying shame that never belonged to me. Christmas morning arrived quietly. There was no rush, no tension, no last-minute stress. Ethan and I got ready without speaking much, not because we were nervous, but because we were calm. We dressed simply and left the house together, side by side, like we always do. There was no need to rehearse anything. We were just going as we were. When we arrived, the house was already full. Laughter spilled into the hallway, and familiar voices filled the rooms. This gathering was happening at the same time as the one Lauren was hosting, and many of the same relatives were here. Different place, same family. As we stepped inside, conversation slowed. Heads turned. A few people looked surprised, others confused, and some quietly relieved. Ethan stood next to me, steady and relaxed. He greeted people politely, shook hands, thanked the host, and moved naturally through the room. There was no hesitation in him, no sign of discomfort. He belonged there, and he carried himself like he knew it. Word spread quickly. Someone whispered. Someone else checked their phone. It didn't take long for everyone to realize that we hadn't disappeared for Christmas. We hadn't stayed home feeling sorry for ourselves. We were present, visible, and welcomed. Then Lauren arrived. She walked in expecting control. Expecting familiarity. Expecting me to be absent. The moment she saw us, her expression froze. She looked at Ethan first, then at me, as if she were trying to make sense of something that wasn't supposed to happen. The room felt still for a brief second. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Ethan nodded politely, the same way he would to anyone. Calm. Respectful. Unbothered. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger ever could. People continued talking. Someone asked Ethan about his drive. Someone thanked him for helping carry food earlier. Small things, but meaningful. He wasn't ignored. He wasn't minimized. He was treated like a normal part of the family gathering. Lauren stayed quiet. She moved through the room, but her confidence was gone. She had planned one version of Christmas, one where she decided who belonged and who didn't. That plan had fallen apart the moment we walked in. I could see it on her face. This wasn't the outcome she expected. She had thought exclusion would make us smaller. Instead, it had placed us somewhere she couldn't control. I felt something settle inside me. Not satisfaction, not pride, just certainty. I hadn't come to prove anything. I hadn't come to make a statement. I had simply shown up where I was welcome, with the person I chose. As the evening went on, the shock faded, but the shift remained. Lauren kept her distance. She watched more than she spoke. And I realized then that sometimes the strongest response to being pushed out is standing calmly where you were never meant to be seen. In that moment, it became clear. She hadn't misjudged the event. She had misjudged us. As the evening went on, something unexpected happened. A family member began sharing stories of Ethan that Lauren had always minimized or overlooked. Quietly, almost casually, they mentioned how he had helped a neighbor's business stay afloat during a tough time, how he had fixed things for relatives without ever asking for anything in return, and how he had supported me in ways no one else noticed. These weren't flashy achievements, but they spoke of integrity, dedication, and real character. People listened. Questions followed. Compliments started to appear where once there had been polite silence. I noticed relatives nodding, smiling, and speaking to Ethan in ways they hadn't before. Respect wasn't forced, it grew naturally as they learned about the man they had underestimated. He didn't seek attention. He didn't boast. He simply accepted their acknowledgement with humility. Lauren watched. She didn't say anything at first, but her expression changed. It wasn't anger that I saw, though there was a flicker of irritation. It was something deeper. She looked unsettled, almost threatened, as if the foundation she had built around status and control was quietly shifting. The more people recognized Ethan, the smaller her influence felt. The narratives she had spun to justify excluding us began to crumble without anyone needing to confront her directly. I stood beside him, quiet and calm. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to point out the truth. It was enough that Ethan's actions and character were visible for everyone to see. I held my head high, letting the respect grow naturally around him. There was no gloating, no triumphal smile, just steadiness. That steadiness carried a power that words never could. The shift was subtle but clear. The people who mattered, who had influence in the family, were looking at Ethan differently. They weren't questioning his worth, they were acknowledging it. And in that quiet recognition, the balance of power in the room had changed. Lauren no longer commanded the attention she assumed she had. Her control over the family's perception had weakened. I could see it in the way she moved, how she spoke less, how she tried to redirect conversations without drawing attention back to herself. It wasn't humiliation in the traditional sense, but it was exposure. Her carefully constructed image was now visible for what it was, fragile and dependent on excluding others. Ethan never sought to prove himself, yet he had. The respect that grew naturally from his character was far stronger than anything Lauren had tried to enforce. And I realized then that true power isn't loud. It doesn't need to dominate or shame. It exists quietly, through honesty, integrity, and the way people naturally respond to it. In that room, surrounded by family, I felt the weight lift. We didn't need confrontation. We didn't need revenge in words. The truth of Ethan's character had done what I could not do alone. And for the first time I saw Lauren not as untouchable, but as human, like everyone else, subject to the quiet justice of. After the initial surprise had settled, Lauren came over and asked to speak with me privately. I followed her into a quiet corner of the room, curious but wary. She started quickly, her tone trying to sound casual, almost conversational, but I could feel the tension beneath her words. She began to speak as if nothing had happened, as if she could rewrite the story of the evening. She said she was only trying to protect the family image. She insisted that excluding Ethan had been for everyone's comfort, that she had acted in the family's best interest, and that I was misunderstanding her intentions. Her words were smooth, polished, and practiced, but they felt hollow. It was the same reasoning she had used for years whenever someone challenged her. I listened quietly, my hands folded, my voice calm. When she paused, I told her plainly that I couldn't accept reconciliation without accountability. I said that actions mattered more than words, and that trying to rewrite history wouldn't erase the hurt caused. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't argue. I simply stated what was true for me. Ethan's dignity had been questioned, and mine had been ignored. That could not be overlooked. Lauren blinked, a subtle flicker of frustration crossing her face. She seemed unprepared for my composure. She expected either tears or a fight, something dramatic to react to, but instead, I stood firm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't desperate for her approval. I was simply present and clear. Ethan, who had quietly followed behind me, remained calm and respectful. He nodded politely when Lauren addressed him, answered questions without defensiveness, and never raised his voice. His quiet strength spoke louder than any words I could have used. Watching him handle the confrontation with dignity seemed to affect Lauren more than anything I said. It was as if every polite gesture highlighted her own lack of control over the situation. Lauren's hands tightened briefly at her sides. Her carefully curated confidence faltered. She realized she no longer dictated the room or the narrative. Her attempts to manipulate perceptions were visible and failing. For the first time, she experienced the shift she had never anticipated. She was not in control, and no amount of explanation could change that. I didn't gloat. I didn't taunt. I simply remained firm, standing beside Ethan, speaking only for myself when necessary. My clarity and calmness contrasted sharply with her need to assert dominance, and in that contrast, the truth became evident. Lauren had built an image based on exclusion, control, and superficial approval, and tonight, that image had cracked. When the conversation ended, she stepped back, her expression a mixture of discomfort and disbelief. I walked away without a word, Ethan at my side. The rest of the evening continued without further confrontation, but the private moment had settled something unspoken. Control had shifted quietly but decisively, and Lauren now understood that her attempts to dominate our lives were over. As the evening went on, I realized that staying longer wouldn't add anything. I had already made my point without raising my voice, without causing a scene. The respect Ethan earned and the quiet acknowledgement from family members had already shifted the balance. There was no need for arguments or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, the strongest message is simply knowing your worth. I told Ethan it was time to leave. We gathered our things calmly, thanked the host, and walked out together. There were no words aimed at Lauren, no attempts to embarrass her. Our exit was quiet, deliberate, and on our terms. Leaving felt like taking back control, reclaiming space that had been denied to us. The next few days brought unexpected developments. Relatives who had noticed the change began reaching out. They called, sent messages, or stopped by to express how glad they were we had been present. They admitted seeing things differently now, acknowledging Ethan's character and the way we had handled the situation. It was the kind of recognition that mattered far more than anything Lauren could have demanded. My parents eventually reached out as well. Their apologies were polite but late. They spoke of misunderstanding, of wanting peace, of not realizing how exclusion had hurt us. It was sincere, in its own way, but it came after the shift had already occurred. The damage to Lauren's carefully constructed hierarchy had been done, and no apology could fully undo it. Lauren, meanwhile, was left to deal with the consequences of her choices. She had tried to control the narrative, to dictate who belonged and who didn't, and in doing so, had isolated herself. Her influence over the family's perception had diminished. The same people she thought she guided quietly were no longer under her control. There were no dramatic punishments or public shaming. The consequence was subtler but sharper. Respect had moved away from her, and dignity had settled beside us. I understood then that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need to destroy or humiliate. True revenge is measured, quiet, and lasting. It comes from living well, standing tall, and refusing to be diminished. It comes from making choices that honor yourself and the people who truly matter. As Ethan and I settled back into our own home that night, the holiday felt different. It was lighter, freer, and full of peace. We had taken back control without confrontation. We had shown that integrity, patience, and calmness carry more weight than anger or retaliation. Lauren's absence in our lives was not a loss but a reflection. The real victory lay in dignity. We had won quietly, without needing anyone to declare it, and that quiet victory resonated far deeper than any argument or harsh word ever could. In the end, respect, calm strength, and self-worth had done what no amount of shouting could have achieved. Sitting quietly the days after Christmas, I had time to think about everything that had happened. I realized how much I had spent my life trying to earn approval, not just from my family but from the people around me. This time, I chose differently. I chose love over approval. I chose Ethan and our life together over trying to fit into someone else's expectations. That choice brought a clarity I had never felt before. Ethan never needed anyone to validate him. He never asked for praise or recognition. All he ever wanted was respect, for himself, for our relationship, and for the life we had built together. Watching him handle the situation calmly, with integrity, made me understand that respect is far more valuable than approval. Approval can be given or taken away depending on someone else's mood, but respect is earned through honesty, patience, and character. Christmas itself wasn't ruined. The illusions around it were. I had believed for years that family events had to look a certain way, that harmony meant following someone else's rules. This experience showed me that harmony built on fear and exclusion isn't real. What I thought was tradition was actually a mask for judgment and control. Once that mask was lifted, I could see clearly what mattered: love, integrity, and dignity. Betrayal had been painful, but it taught me a lesson I needed. It taught me to see people as they are, not as I hoped they would be. It taught me that loyalty and honesty are stronger than appearances. And it taught me that sometimes the people who shame others are actually revealing their own insecurities and fears. They try to diminish what they cannot understand or control. Looking back, I see the truth in this now. People who shame your partner, or try to make you feel small because of who you love, are often ashamed of themselves. Their attacks say more about their weakness than yours. Recognizing this allowed me to let go of anger and embrace understanding. I didn't need to win an argument. I just needed to live my life fully, without shrinking. My peace is permanent now. I no longer carry the weight of trying to meet someone else's impossible expectations. I no longer feel the sting of exclusion because I have built a life where respect and love guide my choices. Lauren's regret, on the other hand, is real and ongoing. She watches the world she tried to control move without her influence. She sees what she could have had and realizes it isn't hers to take back. In the end, I learned that true victory isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't need to punish anyone. It is quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. It comes from living honestly, loving fully, and respecting yourself and others. That is the lesson I carry forward. That is the peace I keep, and that is the life I choose every day.